How's it going, guys? And welcome back to part 2 of TJ Talks About DCL a lot. And once again, similar to part 1, I am not alone. All I need to summarize this guest is 2 words. Female and swish. Welcome, Addison.
I guess those are like if we were playing what's that game? Password. That would work.
Yeah, it's the shortest route.
Yeah,
that is
works.
for sure.
It's an accurate description, I suppose.
So yes, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, we're here to talk about Swish today. And as you might have noticed at the end of the video that I did with Zing, we were talking about like the trends of SP and then what way it would go. And I thought it'd be nice to kind of replicate that with every generation. So it makes sense to kind of go back in one and also get the person that has basically redone the entire draft board in the last year in that tier to hop on and give me her thoughts. However, there is a small thing to go over first, and that is that the captains have been announced and player signups are live. So, there is our list of 8 captains, and shock.
One of them's me.
Yeah, there's Zing and there's Addison. Shock. So yeah, if you want to kind of go into how yourself and Rye kind of came together, although I feel like a lot of people know the story.
Yeah.
Because you were a bit unsure about playing DCL period, weren't you?
Well, basically, for those who don't know, I was pretty much primarily a Wi-Fi player. Boo, it's terrible.
We support them.
No, like I was pretty much. That's true. I was a Wi-Fi player, and what I really respect about Rye is he, ahead of DCL 1, took the time to actually scout that part of the community. Scouted me and said, hey, I actually want you on my team in DCL, and that's how I sort of fell into the whole team tournament world, which I was completely apart from prior. I knew some people, like obviously like Zazu and I, for example, were IRL friends before, for a long time. But when it came to actually competing in the team tournament sort of scene, like DPL, DCL, Rye was the one who actually really brought me into it. So it's a nice full circle moment here where we're coming together and teaming up after, I think, both of us have had, strong performances recently in, respective team tournaments.
Yeah, 100%. And then, any thoughts just in terms of the captain cores in general? And then we might get into some other fun details.
I mean, I think every captain core here is strong. I think there's a lot of yappers and who like to look at signups for players or managers or whatever, and they say, oh my god, this season is so cooked. There's no 8 different infernal armories or whatever. And it's like, A, there's no season like that. B, some of the best teams you've seen have come from some of the most unexpected captain cores. And Ryan and I hoping to be one of those cores in that history. But, obviously I could point it and say, oh, Zing and K-Crit, really strong. L5 and Aster, really strong. Nick and J-Scarf won DPL. But I mean, every single one of these captain cores is capable of putting something together that's really great this season. So, if I was a player, I'd not only, be looking forward to most of these captains, but I'd also be aware that you can have very unexpected experiences if you're drafted by, even if you're not drafted by the captain exactly that you want to draft, that you want to have draft you. Every single one of these captain cores is very capable and very strong. So don't limit reaching out to only 1 or 2 captains. Try and reach out to everyone if you really want to have a shot this season at DCL. And everyone's going to create a great experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's just one of those lists that does look pretty impressive, seeing as some of these players have basically been playing in a team tour for a year straight at this point. Because we've gone from DCL into drafting World Cup, into DPL, and then we're back full circle again. So
outside of Hex, really, which no disrespect, obviously he's probably a very proven player. Every single one of these players not only, has played success stories, you know.
And I'm pretty sure
a lot of
Hex is
them
actually a non-playing captain.
are
I think
winners.
it's just there for hacker moral support, essentially. So that'll play its own dynamic
Sure.
in the auction, things like that.
Yeah, but you never know, you know. So it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the season shapes up. I'm really excited to get captains.
Yeah. And as we kind of alluded to, player signups are now open, so you can get signed up to that if you are somehow found this video and don't know what DCL is. If you did, the YouTube algorithm did its job, I guess. But you know, it's something that I haven't done yet, so I might as well follow my own example and sign up. Yeah, great content here, guys. Me signing up for an event. We'll play that. We'll play SS, so I don't piss Addy off.
Every time there's a new sign up, it goes in our spreadsheet. So we'll add your sign up to our spreadsheet. Not interested, no.
Yeah, what am I these days? GMT plus 1.
No!
Information. Super duper retired. Only in it.
Is this going to be your last season before?
I'm not saying anything. That will be a
Not-
video
not
in its own
the
time where I address the retired allegations, but not for right now, anyways. And submit.
It's going to be in the format of like a YouTube apology video. or
Yes,
something.
100%. That's what it has to be.
Yeah.
Anyways, now that we've had that diversion out of the way, let's talk Swish, shall we? Because I think that
Yeah, let's
makes
do it.
a lot of sense. So,
Heads up to the viewers that I'm playing with rats right now, so if you hear me making like random noises throughout the course of the video, it's me reacting to my rats.
yeah, exactly. So it's just being a rat dude right
Being a
now.
rat
Oh,
mom.
you can see my Discord in a minute. I'm just... Oopsies. That's alright. You probably saw me saying I was sharing screen earlier too. I forget how YouTube works sometimes. But anyways, so I've pulled up this document, and this is from Draft Number League Season 8. And this is just an example of how the Switch metagame used to be, in quotations. Like, I'm sure
Yeah,
you kind
I
of want to
mean,
go into more detail on that, because there is eras before this that we could bore
Yeah,
you to death.
I mean, I think the Swish board has sort of evolved in stages, right? At least since I've been around. When I showed up to DCL 1, you know, we were still toying with Spectrier and Zamazenta Crown, and even like in DCL 1, like it felt like Smogon's decision initially was to add more power to the Sword and Shield tier list, like Kiram Black without Dragon Dance or whatever, as a means to balance, you know, those things out. But it ended up just being, you know, in this first stage of revisions that people realized that, you know, Spectrier, mostly Zamazenta, was really unhealthy and unbalanced. And the reason is because when you're drafting your teams, you always had to account for these mons, and it always required so much attention in the drafting process that you would have teams that mostly looked the same because you only had the same so-and-so mons that could check, you know, mostly Spectrier plus Zamazenta Crown, but mainly Spectrier. So much so that like every draft is basically like a 7-mon draft with a normal type for like 2 points. And
Shout out to Munchlex.
that, and it meant that basically you had to like roll compress into 7 slots, slap on a normal type, your Spectrier answer. And it mostly meant, you know, balanced teams with very similar structures.
Yeah.
So basically, you know, once those mons went, that was the start. But ultimately, the other side of things, which has nothing to do with Spectrier or Zamazenta or whatever, it's just that there was a lot of mons on the tier list that just never got picked up, that stayed at that price point because they were just supposed to be at that price point, or maybe they saw success early gen, or saw success in a previous generation, right? And yeah, it just, tiering wasn't happening on a usage basis. It was happening based in like a strength/vibes basis. And I just didn't think that was accurate, right? So when I was able to have some amount of influence in the Sword and Shield tier list for DCL2, you know, we saw the decrease in some of those mons when I really pushed for usage-based tiering. But what I did in DPL 9 and DCL as well is I really pushed that further because, you know, we found out that, you know, everyone always had Mamoswine, for example, at like 12 points, right? Oh my god, really strong. Its dual stab kills everything, but it's super slow. And also, like, it's a really bad ground type in this meta, right? Because it doesn't really beat Coco, it doesn't beat Zeraora, which are the two top electric types. So not everyone really picked it. So what we found is, like, even when we dropped it to like 10 points, for example, no one was picking it up, and people were so scared. Oh my god, Mamoswine can't be 10 points. That's crazy. But what we found is that even when we dropped them in points, they still weren't being picked up. And when they were making themselves more vulnerable to specific mons, because, you know, your ground type in Sword and Shield very frequently has to, you know, check a lot of major threats. So that's just one example. So now in like DCL 3, I think Mamoswine's like 9. So it's dropped a whole 3 points. And we've sort of seen this for what I guess a lot of players would think is core typings, like ground types, for example. You know, you have the Nidos, which are very core in Sword and Shield. But you have, you know, other ground types like Seismitoad or Mamoswine or, you know, even lower tier ground types as well that just don't get picked up at all. And that's mostly because they can't account for those top tier threats as well. So, yeah, dropping them seemed to make a lot of sense. And that's basically what we've done. And I think it's worked quite well, because it meant that it creates a little bit more innovation. It inspires people to draft those mons a little bit more and compensate for their loss in other areas. So that's one side of things. But I think the more exciting side of things too is that you have other mons like Heliolisk or Lucario or Entei, right, who were probably in like the 8-9 point echelon beforehand. And now they've been dropped to as, you know, 5 points, 4 points, as little as 2 points in Heliolisk's case. And it really has been, you know, pretty healthy because it means that you have these mons that you'd never otherwise see, you know, actually get some play, or at least hopefully they will, because, you know, even still with some of these drops, not every single mon is getting drafted. I mean, it's a big board, so there's a lot to see. But ultimately, you know, we were seeing the same 40 or so mons get drafted beforehand. Now there's a bit more innovation happening, I think. It's not just innovation, like creating new like metagames or whatever, although, like, you know, I think this does open up like more offensive options in Sword and Shield. But I don't know, generally speaking, I think, let's say creativity, it inspires more creativity. You're allowed to get things that might compromise you against the top tier threats, but might still have more power in general than you'd otherwise expect, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah, 100%. Just to kind of pedal back on some of the stuff you said about 5 minutes ago now, because that was seriously in-depth.
Sorry.
No, you're so fine. That's exactly what I wanted from this. So you mentioned...
I'm simultaneously talking and trying to like scoop up rats. So
yeah, you're completely fine. I think just kind of pedaling back, because you could go back even further than the DCL1 days if you wanted, because funnily enough you can blame your co-cap for that. Yeah. Because the thought process at the time was there's not enough round 1 mon, like round 1 worthy mons within Swish. And so that kind of led to the idea of, oh, let's do Zamazenta Ground, let's do Kieran Black. You know, Spectrier was still kind of a debatable topic. We could go back even further if you wanted, to the days where, like, balance was fun and you could win games by slow-paced, and that's when I was good at Swish. But that quickly died a death as people realized that it just becomes a weakness policy simulator.
No, I actually see. I'll push back against that. I really disagree with that framing because ultimately balance still reigns true in Sword and Shield. Like, we're talking about who are sort of the highest metagame threats right now, we're talking about Torn. And Torn wasn't winning games mostly by being Life Orb or, you know, offensive options. It was winning games by being fat, regen, knock, U-turn, toxic. Like, those were the sets it was mostly running, you know?
Yeah.
So we're still seeing balance very alive and true. The difference is that we're seeing offense as a means to break down balance, and that's just what the metagame is, right? But you're still seeing success of balanced teams quite well. I mean, I would describe. I'm getting really niche here, and I'll stray away from this after this comment.
You're so
like,
fine.
I would describe like Glop and Paddock's team, for example, last EPL, as quite, you know, maybe bulky offense, but definitely not offense. And those were the most successful teams in Swish on paper. So it's alive and well, I think.
No, but it's just
what I think this tier list accomplishes is it gives more options. It gives people more options in terms of drafting, and it's not a, you know, Galarian Slowking versus Galarian Slowking simulator. It's actually, you know, you're seeing a higher variety of mons being drafted. I think that's just the bottom line.
100%.
You're seeing the same mons that you saw before. The Nidos were getting spammed, Slowbros getting spammed, you know, the Lotties were getting spammed, Necrozma, Mew. Even in the middle state, like Cinderace was being spammed. But now you're seeing stuff, and those mons are still being drafted. But now you're also seeing, you know, Galarian Darmanitan. You never saw Galarian Darmanitan before. You're now seeing, you know, a lot of other offensive pieces like Starmie or, you know, Tapu Lele. Like, these are mons that were not being drafted before. But now because of their price lowering, they are actually being drafted. And they're even being slotted onto more bulky offense balance type teams because they can be justified to do so at their price point.
Yeah. No, just what I actually meant was the days where you could, because for those that kind of knew me playing Swish, which I'm not sure how much you actually saw, this would have been the days of like multi-gen leagues and things like that.
I would have seen absolutely nothing.
Yeah, so these were the days where I would spam like Mew, Clefable, Weavile teams, and I would basically just have a slow-ass pivoty game and then win with set of Mew by like turn 40. So yeah, those were simpler times. Doesn't work anymore. Hasn't worked since DCL Season 6. Rest in pieces.
I still think it's a very viable strategy, though. I still think it's a very viable strategy. I mean, the thing that's least viable about that strategy is that speed is king in Sword and Shield. Like, speed is so hard to come by.
And that 3 is not possible.
So Weavile is really pivoting to a, you know, late, or I'd say early round 2 type status. Like, it's very hard to get Mew and Weavile on the same team.
100%.
But it's possible. You know, Mew can always fall to like round 6, and then Weavile falls to round 2, and then you get a Clefable. Like, I think it is actually quite possible. But you need a bit of luck in the draft.
Yeah, that's 100%. It used to be a lot more.
But the big thing, the big thing is just is speed. Everyone really wants speed, and it's hard to get it. And yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Like, I was talking about lowering ground types that weren't being drafted. Like, we've lowered speed that isn't drafted because speed is so important. You know, if someone doesn't get Zero Aura or Coco or whatever, like,
drafted here.
You actually want to have some options. So I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. If you go to the SS tiering board, and then go down to like...
Oh, we're skipping quite a bit here. That's fine.
If you control F, Alolan Persian, that's where it starts, I think.
Oh, okay, I see exactly.
We've just like gone down the board from Alolan Persian to Alakazam and like really decreased the price of those mons because these are fast speed options that aren't getting drafted, right?
Yep.
So let's make that more accessible to the teams that don't get a Zero Aura and don't get a Coco and don't get, you know, because otherwise people have to settle for Talonflame or Crobat, and those mons actually haven't seen a ton of success lately. So it's nice to give people options. I'm really excited about Inteleon. Like, I think Inteleon's gonna pop off. Aerodactyl too. Like, these are mons that I'm really interested to see. Hopefully get drafted this time.
Inteleon's definitely one of those interesting mons because I've seen it put in work in like multi-gen. Like, Skyhorse loved using this thing around like UDL multi-gen time. Put in serious work for him. So
yeah,
I'd say you will see. I'd say you will see a team take a punt on him. But
I hope so.
we're
and
kind
I
of
mean,
getting ahead of ourselves
I just
because...
sorry.
No, you're completely fine. I don't care. But it's one of those things, we were just kind of showing where Swish was, and then obviously you got your mitts basically on the entire draft board. And then we get to DPL Season 9. And I have the usage stats here because, just in case anyone is kind of not copped onto this, Addison is a giant sucker for usage rather than like win percentages, which I think makes sense in a tier like Swish because it's one of those tiers that
honestly,
no, go ahead.
Redraft board should do it, is my opinion. Like, I think it's just a general philosophy to me where it's like, if a mon is not getting drafted, there's a reason it's not getting drafted. Like, I hate this idea that, like, oh, but it's really strong and it's just not getting drafted because, like, you know, shrug your shoulders, why not? Like, if something isn't getting drafted, maybe it's not because it's a weak Pokemon, but it, like, the 8-mon format requires so much roll compression, it requires so much, you know, roles to be filled. So if you take a mon like Tapu Lele, for example, which was like priced at like 16 or 15 in like seasons prior to some of the recent seasons, you know, it was never getting taken because it was never a fairy type that could defensively withstand anything, and it never filled any role, and it never really filled you know, speed in any way or anything like that. And you know, steel types were really strong and continue to be very strong. It was literally impossible to justify Tapu Lele ever. But it stayed there because people were like, well, it's a Tapu Lele. And, you know, it just doesn't make any sense to do anything like that, I think. I think if it's not getting drafted, it's not getting drafted for a reason. We bumped it down to like, you know, 13 as of last DPL, and we saw it get drafted. And was the team broken by any means? No, because it had to give up other roles in order to make room for a cheap Tapu Lele. So where it got a benefit of a, very powerful 13-point Tapu Lele, it lost a lot of points and an extra slot on stuff where other roles could have been filled. So I think that's something that can be applicable to every tier list, but I'm in Sword and Shield jail, so I can't influence anything else besides this.
Don't call
I've been
it like
really trying to push similar stuff for... I enjoy it, but I've been really trying to push like the same philosophy for like Scarlet Violet, for example.
Yeah.
Like Paracerolege is really big right now, but like King Terra Necrozma is priced higher than it, and I think that's just ridiculous. I think that's just so silly. And like no one is using Terra Necrozma. And I brought this up, and the tier people didn't do anything about it, so that's their loss.
They're still autumn seasonal.
I'm just saying,
I'd say
like,
there'll be a lot more experimentation there. That's another conversation.
Yeah, we'll see.
Time,
we'll see. It's another conversation, but you know what I mean. Like, I think usage is king. Really, is my take on it.
On the topic of SV, do you think that the ways that people have been approaching SV in the manner that there isn't really any rules to drafting, do you think that's kind of transferred over to Swish in a way? So people are kind of less afraid to be like, oh, but I don't have this, therefore I struggle with XYZ.
I think it really depends on the type of player you are and the type of play style you're going for. Like, my sort of thought is like, you know, and again, where I pushed back before about what you said about balance is, if you want to get a team that is just, you know, you get your grounded poison, you get your ground type, you get your hazards, you get your removal, you get your bulky fairy, and you get your, you know, your teleport or whatever, and it's a, you know, a fat balance team with maybe one breaker that you're pivoting into constantly and breaking, that's an effective mode in Sword and Shield because you're covering all your bases and you have a good defensive backbone and you have strong offensive pieces. I think the difference is that it felt like that mode of drafting was all you could ever do prior to the changes in Sword and Shield drafts. Now, I think you can still do those things and be very successful. We've seen teams that have been able to do that, but now you have the added option of doing really hyper offensive drafts where you say, actually, I don't need a, you know, a grounded poison. I don't need a, you know, dedicated, you know, fat steel type that's going to take on, you know, this mon or whatever, because you're just going to kill the mon instead. You're not going to defensively swap into it if you make those sort of hyper offense drafts. So the answer is yes and no. It depends on what you're looking for, right? If you're looking for a more slow-paced, balanced team where you have sustainable answers to everything, then no, I wouldn't compare it anywhere close to SV at all. But if you're really trying to just overwhelm your opponent and make predictions and be bold, which I think requires a whole other level of playing, if it works, it can be as successful as it can be more successful than any other type of play. But it requires, you know, you to be actually bold in the game and bold in the builder and make big predictions and really force the issue in the actual games. And when you're doing that, it doesn't matter if you don't have a defensive switch in to X, Y, and Z. So it really depends on your own confidence as a player and as a builder and what type of play style you're going for, is my take on it.
Yeah. That's actually a really interesting perspective, because what you're effectively saying is that Swish can be as formulaic as you want it to be, or it can be as free as you want it, which basically makes it the most kind of exploratory generation, because, like, we'll get into it when I do
that's why I love it.
When you do kind of cover Usum and Horus, is, like, I don't think you quite have that same degree of freedom. And I don't know, is that because, like, in Usum's case, Z moves exist? Like, is it a mechanical thing? But that's just a really interesting way to put it. And this is why we have you covering Swish.
I don't know enough about Usum and Horus to make that Swifter comparison. I mean, I think, from my understanding, a lot of it is also hazards and, you know, Gen 8 having heavy-duty boots.
100%.
You know, allows more offense teams to, like, when I had, you know, I had a team in last DCL with, like, Galarian Moltres, Togekiss, and G-Darm. And it's like, okay, all Rock Weak Mons, my removal, you know, I had good removal, but, like, realistically, I was never clicking Rapid Spin. And I just ran boots on things if I needed to, right? So, whereas a playstyle like that in Usum or Horus, like, your Mons are taking so much damage every single turn.
Yeah.
So,
we've seen people try that before,
you know,
and it's just failed horribly.
I think that's one factor to it. I think boots are a big meta changer. I think the other factor to it is that, you know, not to toot my own horn, I made the tier list in such a way where if you want to do balance, you can do balance. If you want to do a more offense team, you have the capacity to do it. And I mean, I'll even, like, respect to Theo, for example, too. Like, Theo, under this draft board, or a similar one, had a great season last DCL, and he drafted a very stally team. And I still think that team would succeed super well, right? So even the other side of the spectrum, where you're looking at, you know, obviously Torn T, stuff like that, but he was able to find innovation in the other side of things where he was drafting Suicune, right? No one has seen Suicune in Sword and Shield anytime, you know, at all. But, you know, that was a defensive mon that dropped due to usage, and he was able to find success with it in his playstyle. So it's just, I think it benefits all sides of the coin. I think people are saying, ooh, offense, whatever, because that's kind of more so what I play. But I think everyone kind of in every different spot has been able to find innovation with it. And that's what's been so exciting to me.
Yeah, 100%. You do kind of say on the offense point, like, you have yourself, you have Craig, Wop can very much lean into the offense side of things as well. So I think it makes a lot of sense that you kind of think that way. But then, especially now, of course, with, you know, with PDG playing this DCL, like, I'm sure we'll see the offense go even more off the walls. Love you, TGG. But, but, like, you are completely right. Theo will also find success with this board, and that's what makes it such a...
Well, and the other thing, too, is, like I played balance for... I'm trying to do the mental math. I think I played balance in 3 of my 7 weeks in DCL. Like, my 2 other teams were very hard balance teams, or maybe bulky offense, but, like, you know, I played them in a much more defensive way. So, you know, even players, oh, they're an offense player, they're a stall player, whatever, they can draft multiple teams and kind of pick and choose given matchups and things like that. Whereas before, every single team was quite similar, you know, in terms of pacing and things of that sort. So, yeah.
Absolutely. But we won't get into the philosophical side of what is offense. And, you know, where is the hard boundary? You know, that's a different lecture. Maybe I'll have to get you back for that. But so the viewer has probably been staring at this Swish draft board from last DPL for the last, I'd say, about 10 minutes at this point, because we've gotten so much of the conversation. I hope you guys are enjoying it.
Fair enough.
But it's just to kind of show. So obviously, you know, how much we've changed the board, or say we, you. We as a community, being very, communist here. But you still look at it, Garchomp and Torti are still top 2. Like, no matter how much you change, they're still going to be top 2.
Yeah,
Like,
I think they're top 2. I think there's a question of is Torn better than Garchomp, but I think they're pretty undisputable top 2.
We're going back to 2022 days, are we? Of like,
yeah, we might
maybe. We'll get into that later though, because that'll kind of come up during trends. Because we do have usage stats to talk about here, and then going into, we'll show the DCL tier list for this season, and then kind of go into what we're expecting.
Sure.
But 19, 18, 17, nothing too surprising here in terms of like usage. You see one Clefable, one Galar Slowking. Try to tell that to someone in like 2022.
Are we looking at season 8 or season 9?
This is the season 9 dog.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Yeah, so like
there's a lot to keep up with. That's fine.
Galarian Slowking wasn't drafted very much, but it was drafted on one team that was a finalist team. So to that extent, I care about usage. But I think Clefable is the one that's a little bit more jarring. Like and the tier list is a little skewed because Theo wasn't playing. But
yes, for sure.
Clefable, I was the one player to draft Clefable, and it was on a pretty like bulky offense team. Like the one time I brought the team, I brought like the max speed life orb Clefable. So you'll see in out of these top tiers, Clefable is the one that actually dropped to 14 because I can yap about how balance is still viable, but since there is more offense, it means Clefable less frequently can keep on pace. So that's dropped. Blaziken, Zarude, all have 0 usage. That's dropped. Other stuff too. So yeah it's interesting.
It will be interesting to see with Clef, because that was a mod I was going to bring up, but I might as well bring up this point now, because there was a DPL season a couple years ago. This was an Usum, but Seidel used it, and he basically used it on this offensive team as a pivot healing wish bot. And I do wonder, is that something that'll kind of come up in Swish now because of its price point, because it's that little bit more accessible, that you could get it, round 3, round 4, and it's like, oh, I want to healing wish up my Garchomp? Cool, I can do that. Like, there's definitely a future for it in that.
Yeah, I mean,
if you can keep it away from Theo, of course.
I think it's a reasonable case for a lot of mods that have dropped that they're going to be justifiable in other roles, right? Because if you have, your 18-pointer, your 16-pointer, your 17-pointer, you don't want any of those mods to be like, just a kind of meek defensive pivot or like hazard setter or whatever. But when they drop to 13 points, 12 points, you can justify them being in a bit more of a support role. It doesn't mean they have to be, but the reason you can justify them being in a bit more support role is because naturally, because they're a lower price, you have other stronger mods. So if you're drafting, let's just say, for the sake of argument, Clefable was 16 2 seasons ago. Yeah. Which I'm pretty sure it was. Maybe it was even 17. Yeah, I think it may have been 17. And now it's 14. I mean, that's 3 points that, you save, and you get a different 17-pointer now. You know what I mean? So there's, by nature of Clefable not being the second best mon on your team or whatever, it has a bit more flexibility in roles to justify, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Let me kind of look at these middle tiers here. Nothing too crazy that's a major conversation starter. Because, you are seeing mons that
the middle tier, are you talking about, 10, sort of?
Yeah, the teens, and then, high 10s. High single digits.
So the big things of note in these tiers that I noticed is... So I'll start with the 13 points. I'll be very quick, I promise. Excadrill is interesting to me, right? Because it comes to sort of weather, and it's a ground type that beats Coco, right? And it beats Coco arguably better than the Nidos beat Coco. It's a removal, which is hard to come by. And there's not a lot of ghosts in Sword and Shield, so you don't get fucking Dusknoir spin blocking you. So it's interesting that mon doesn't get drafted. So we decreased that in price. Galarian Moltres was an increase that
that didn't quite pan out.
did from the previous season that didn't quite pan out, so that gets reset, is the idea. Slowking, not really drafted. Thunderous Eye, not really drafted. Zapdos Galar, not really drafted. Zygarde, not really drafted. That's just usage.
Yeah.
Ferrothorn and Heatran are very interesting. When it comes to steel types in Sword and Shield, there's kind of the big three. And the big three are Melmetal, Aegislash, and Scizor. And after that, people kind of perceive a big drop-off. And, you know, Ferrothorn and
just natural
Heatran are...
association.
People are gravitating towards Steelix, or even now, like, Corviknight before Heatran, Ferrothorn. So it seems reasonable to say that actually Heatran and Ferrothorn are worth equal to or less than Corviknight, which is receiving more interest as steel, or even Cobalion, which is receiving more interest, or Metagross, right?
Yeah.
So those two steel types dropped. And then Urshifu Rapid, I remember like all the sort of like Smogon normies were like, why is Urshifu Rapid Strike? You know, 12 points. It's
sorry lads,
super
Sebi isn't
broken or
here,
whatever.
therefore it's not getting Team Tour usage, therefore it drops in price. That's how that works. If
Well, I
Sebi
think
was
also
here, it would
fundamentally,
keep
again,
price.
People are so fixated on getting really good speed in Sword and Shield, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
And Urshifu Rapid Strike just isn't fast relative to where it needs to be. And if it wants to run Choice Scarf, it's susceptible to Rocky Helmet because there's no, punching glove or whatever. So, and if you are protected pads, then you are not only slow, but you're weak, and you don't have any great defensive merit. I think its Svidef is like really terrible. So, yeah, I Urshifu Rapid got picked up and then I think dropped in mids, and I played it. I think Toxic picked it up and tried to use it, and it was just never an issue. It never felt scary. And the other side of things too is similar to Lele. What is it checkbox for you, right? You get your water type, but you don't want Urshifu Rapid Strike switching into your to your Keldeos or your other things like that. So ultimately, you're spending 12, 13 points on something that doesn't really help you in any way. So I think Urshifu Rapid Strike may find a place in more offensive builds where they care a little bit less about defensive switch-ins, but yeah, it just doesn't really do it.
Because I really can't think of anyone other than Sebi that kind of had success with this thing. But the thing is, Sebi always loved it on his Torti structures. So and that just kind of checks all the
and
stuff.
that might be a thing, right?
That could welcome that.
So we'll see.
So.
We'll see. I think that would be a welcome mod. I mean, there was a Torn team that did really well with Buzzwole, right?
Yeah.
I could see
the same idea.
Urshifu Rapid Strike being in the place of Buzzwole. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not saying it's unviable. I'm just saying it's not 15 points or whatever the fuck it was before. So that's the side of things. Other stuff in 11 I won't comment on too much. Like Size Toad, we dropped one again because ground type not being drafted. If it's an essential type that's not being drafted, it's a question of like, why is that happening? And then like one of the steepest drops in Sword and Shield was Reuniclus in 10 points. And there's a few reasons behind this. It was the highest tier mon that didn't get drafted in the entire Sword and Shield Cup. So what is that, like 300 and something drafts and not a single one drafted Reuniclus? That's pretty whack. And then same thing goes with like defensive, pieces, especially in these late rounds when you grab a lot of your luxury pieces in your top tier offense. You're really looking for things like patch weaknesses, which is why people get blend their steel and their ground type with Steelix, or try and like nab their grounded poison or whatever. And Reuniclus just does none of it. It's a pure psychic type, arguably like in the same echelon as like Bug when it comes to like defensive merit in Sword and Shield, right?
Yeah.
And if you want a strong psychic type, you have Mew, you have Necrozma, all these sort of things. So Reuniclus dropped all the way to 7 points this season. And who knows? I mean, it might not even get drafted. We'll see.
Yeah.
And I think Gardevoir met the same fate as well. And there was one other mod that I think did too. So yeah, Cresselia as well. So
makes sense.
We'll get to it, but like a lot of drops for psychics, because mid-tier psychics, because they just don't do anything for teams other than just exist.
We are 40 minutes into this video. We haven't even mentioned Swish Cup's existence, so that shows how we're doing.
Yeah.
Well, SS Cup, is there anything you kind of want to talk about briefly? Because I know you kind of used it as a testing ground stuff with the
So,
intention of redefining for DCL, which we'll get into in a sec. But
Yeah, I'll be quick. Basically, we made an initial tier list for DCL 3, and then we let SS Cup from Smogon play out the drafting stage to see, okay, what mods are getting drafted, what mods are not getting drafted, and it became very apparent, even with some of the changes we were making, that there were certain, mainly like certain steals, certain grounds that you would think would get picked, right, and just weren't across a sample size of like 320. So basically, any mod that wasn't drafted across 320 boards, I can pretty safely assume is not going to be like seriously considered in the 3x8, 24 draft boards in DCL.
yeah,
So I sort of dropped all those as well. So it was sort of a second layer of adjusting. You can either show it now or later, but there's a spot in the tiering board that has all the changes that we made post.
we might as well get into it now. Yeah, we
what's it called?
can scroll all the way down. We don't want to spoil too
So
much.
it starts with Rhianoclus. It starts with Rhianoclus and then goes a bit further down. So these are like, for example, some drops that came when it was like, okay, we realized that Rhianoclus didn't get picked at all from 10 points. I think it was 9 points. We dropped it once, then it didn't get picked there either. So dropped to 7. Heracross didn't get picked or got picked like once out of like 320 boards, etc., etc. So all these mods saw some decrease in price. A lot of mods.
Ending on a Thievel.
And then,
Shout out Scrappy 10.
yeah, there you go.
Simpler times.
Which is, a mod that was 2 points because it was there for Spectre, right?
Yeah.
So now it's not. What's the point in drafting a Thievel?
You're underestimating Unburdened Sweep or Thievel.
We'll find out. I mean, if someone gets an Unburdened Sweep with Thievel, we'll find out.
Did you never see that replay?
I don't think I did. I think that's
Scrappy
before my
10 Sharky
time.
game? Oh, that's iconic. Yeah.
Before my time.
Yeah, before your time. The youths of today.
And then things above it as well. Like, we had some decreases from stuff above, too.
Yeah, 100%.
Nothing crazy, though.
Right, I think we should probably stop beating around the bush and show the actual SS board. And the big elephant in the room...
edging the viewers.
Yeah. And the elephant in the room is there's a 20-point tier. And there's 2 obvious ones in it.
Yeah.
Like, I know
So
you were
this was a big shock to me. This was not my idea or out of seat or whatever. I didn't even know this was allowed. But there was a conversation in the Smoke on General chat that was like, let's make a 20-point tier for Scarlet Violet, because I think what people were realizing is that like there's a big drop off between like the first couple of picks in Scarlet and Violet and then the back couple of picks. Probably worse than Sword and Shield, to be honest with you.
100%.
The disparity between the first 4 rounds and the back 4 rounds. Actually, if you talk to TDG, you'll find out this is quite interesting. In some seasons, the back half of the Sword and Shield draft
Did
is
better,
more
yeah. I've
successful
actually
than the front half,
had this conversation before.
which is really funny. I mean, DCL 2, Coco and Chomp both had horrific performances.
Yeah.
And I think Torn just had kind of a mid performance, like 60%. I mean, that's better than mid, but you know what I mean. Like, whereas Cartana had like an 80-something% win rate, and Mew had like a 80-something%. So, it's not a huge deal. But the reason that if you compare it to the DPL 9 board, the DPL 9 sort of front part of the Sword and Shield tier list is a bit of a shit show, but it is kind of unresolvable because, so for example, like Cartana is a really, or actually, let me do the 18-point tier. So like, T and Coco are way fucking better than Kyurem Zero Aura. But Kyurem Zero Aura aren't 17-pointers.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where it's like, we couldn't move them up to 19 without that being like ridiculous, but we could move them down without that also being ridiculous. So it just kind of like makes things a little bit more coherent. Because I think the undisputed top 4 picks of Sword and Shield are Garchomp, Torn, Landorus, and Coco. And if that's the case, they should be in a tier of their own. So this allows them to actually be in a tier of their own, where you have the first and second best mods in the tier. In the 20-point tier, you have the third and fourth in the 19-point tier, and then you sort of have the rest going from there.
Yeah.
And I think it's a bit more reflective of where the meta's at. whereas before, like, it wasn't ideal, but we were kind of just forced to kind of clump. What you sort of see the 19 and 18 point as in the tier list, that would have just been, you know, 18 points, and Garchomp and Torn would have been 19. I just think that would have been really clunky and wrong, frankly, because while Kartana has been making strides, it's not Coco. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
while Kira,
you know,
is always going to be an amazing back half pick. It's not Coco. It's not Lando. So, you know, and there was goof heads who were saying Zero Aura is better than Coco in DPL, and like that's been proven false.
I'm
like it's
pretty
not
sure
true.
that's an awesome discussion rather than this.
Yeah, but some people were like, you know.
Yeah.
So, and then you also see a couple increases as well. Weavile is the big one. I mean, Weavile is, I think, a top 10 mon in the format.
I would agree.
So that is a at minimum, frankly. So it being 16 points alongside Dragonite or, you know, Galarian Slowking, I think is a bit ridiculous. Keldeo we saw success with, so that increased in price as well. But generally speaking, we don't have a lot of increases. Mostly it's just decreases. So those are the notable increases, I should say.
Yeah.
I
mean,
and then
there's some marginal
a lot of the other stuff is just dropped.
Yeah. You have a
Some
couple,
marginal ones.
Yeah, just based on like success of, and what I like to call like crate tax. So like we saw Grimsnarl increase. I think Starmie go up. I know you were talking about Starmie going up. I don't know if it actually did.
I think it was 9 before, and now it's 10. So you know, Craig tax a little bit, but I also think, you know, Starmie in DCL2 was like, you know, 11. So you know, we're just finding a happy middle ground here.
Exactly. Because people are starting to use it again because they're realizing, oh, good speed tier, rapid spins actually is really good coverage, and you know,
like,
can
people
boost.
kind of lose their shit. It's like you can't drop them on like, you know, 3 points. You have to do it gradually or whatever. But it's like, it's okay if it's like 1 point cheaper than it should be. If we find out that it's good, you know, find a happy medium. Don't, you know, make it take like 7 seasons for you to reach a conclusion about a mod. So that's why I think these drastic changes are good. And then, you know, on the, you know, 5% of them that were dropped too low, and I'm not being hyperbolic, they're probably about 5% were maybe too low, quote unquote. You bump them up a tier the next season. It's not game breaking. So that's kind of what, you know, we saw happen with Starmie, with Grimmsnarl, where it's like, okay, these are good mons. You know, Grimmsnarl's not 9 points like it was before, but we put it at 6, and now it's at 7. You know what I mean? And same with Starmie. It's not 11 points, but now I've made it 10. You know, since it's all at success at 9.
Grimmsnarl becomes a 9-point.
That's kind of the idea.
If it gets parting shot, but like we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
It actually becomes too good in this metagame. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else in particular here? No, I think we kind of covered a lot of it just in terms of drops, in terms of the couple subtle rises, and the 20-point tier was kind of the big one. So I'm just gonna go back.
I think the other side of things too is like the bottom edge of the tier list, like the 3-pointers, 4-pointers. Like we saw a ton of drops further down there as well. Like not just with the speed, but like you know, we got like Regidrago and like you know, Flygon and like all these mons that are just never gonna get drafted. So hopefully we see some interesting low tier picks. I have a few in my mind, so we'll see. We'll see.
Keep them close to your chest.
Some others do this.
Can't have that being spoiled in the masses.
No, I'm not doing that.
Also, just gonna shout out 6-point Celebi here because it's actually nice to see this thing getting usage. I'm using it myself in Swish Cup, and I got a weakness policy with it, so I have to give
That's
it
great. That's awesome.
Yeah. Fuck you, Oni. Who says that Celebi is non-viable?
And that's it. And that's, to me, that's a mon Celebi that can be on a more offensive team
100%.
and run Healing Wish and stuff, or weakness policy, or it can be on a fatter team. Like I think the one time I brought Celebi, it was like a really fat beach seed set or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So
it can do so much.
You have options.
Yeah. Like, and this is the nice thing about the tier list is because there's so many mons that you're like, God, I haven't seen that being used in years. Like, you know, I know we constantly joke about things like Arctazult because it got bumped up in price that one time because of Hail being good, because it also had Spectriator single strike on the same team. But like,
it's stupid.
Yeah, but there is just mons here that you haven't seen usage in years, and it's kind of really nice to see that. Where you're also seeing drops from mons like Eldegoss, which if you told me a couple of years ago Eldegoss is dropping in price, I'd be like, you're mad, because everyone and their mother was dropping Eldegoss.
Well, that's another case of a happy medium, right? So we had Eldegoss in 3 points, and we had Delmies in like 5 points.
Yeah.
And everyone was drafting Eldegoss. And then we put Delmies in 3 points and Eldegoss in 3 points, and everyone was still drafting Eldegoss. And it's like, okay, well, I guess Eldegoss is just better than Delmies. And everyone was drafting Eldegoss like round like 6 or something ridiculous, right? In every single draft. So we moved it from 3 to 5, and we're like, okay, 3 to 5, we'll see if Eldegoss still gets drafted. You know, we have Serena in the same price point, Delmies in the same price point. And Eldegoss, I don't know whether it was, wrong or not, but it just wasn't picked up in 5 points. We said, okay, fine, we'll move it back to 4. So that's sort of again, that sort of happy middle example where we bumped it up a bunch. It didn't see as much usage. It didn't see any usage, actually. And then, we bumped it down. If one person drafted 5-point Eldegoss and had success with it, I'd keep it there. But no one drafted it, so it goes down to 4.
Yeah. Simple logic, to be honest. So, I think the best way to end this is similar to how I ended with Zing. I'm just going to pull up the stats here real quick. I know you're not someone that's massive in terms of, like, win percentages of bonds and things like that, but...
No, but it's interesting. It's interesting to look at.
It also kind of associates trends because people are like, oh, this is good, this is what I'm going to do to try to deal with the thing that's really being good.
Yeah.
So, you can see Torn T here. It was unbeaten in the regular season in this tier. It's only lost coming in playoffs. So, and a big trend of that was because of the revamped board, people weren't drafting the typical mon that you would see that would be like considered anti-Tornadus or anti-Coco in a way, but Torn benefited a lot more.
Yeah.
And those being, your Lanterns of this world, your Stunfisks and things like that. Do you think those mons will kind of make a return because people are like, oh shoot, Torn is like super good at the minute, I kind of need that fatter electric back? Or do you think people will still kind of shy away from it?
Yeah, I think I don't think people will shy away from it, but I think
Stunfisk
so
is boring,
Glop had a really good analysis with L5, which is that Torn saw so much success, because you sort of had shifts in the tier list and people were really fixated on a lot of new options. And there were certain mons on the tier list that didn't really change in price, and were still there, that just people kind of ignored this time around because they were so fixated on getting some of the new mons that, were 6 points or previously like 9 or 10 points, whatever. So people neglected Lantern and people neglected Stunfisk and, things of that sort. And it was just kind of a perfect storm for Torn to succeed. Do I think that Torn is likely to have, the same season that it did in DPL? I think it's very unlikely. I think it still have a good season. But yeah, I think people will be a little bit more mindful this time around to say, oh yeah, you gotta deal with Torn. Whereas I think it was off people's radar a little bit in the previous season.
Like, maybe people will get a bit innovative with it, rather than just kind of go back to Lantern, go back to Stunfisk. Like, I know we kind of mentioned Steelix already. It's not really a Torn check, guys. Like, it can try.
No, Steelix isn't really a Torn check. I mean, I think the way that people are innovative with it would be more offensively, right? So if we are decreasing the price of certain offensive mons, that could be something to consider. Like, Circuitry is now like super cheap. Mamoswine is now cheaper, right? So that's priority Ice Shard. Yeah. We have, very cheap, it's like 5, maybe? 4? We have very cheap, like, Dracozolt. There's all this other stuff, too. So it'll be interesting to see, 100%, if this is something people account for. And I think it's possible that they account for it with Stunfisk and Lantern. It's possible they account for it in a new way. But either way, I think it'll be accounted for.
Yeah, I 100%
a little
agree.
bit more
It did too well to just be ignored.
Well, I guess one example is Aerodactyl. Like, I think J Scarf is using Aerodactyl as his Torn check, which not only outspeeds obviously, but resists Hurricane and stuff.
Yeah.
So like that's a mon that dropped in price. That's really great as a Torn check, and also speed, and also like defog and all that stuff, right? That people were looking so hard for.
It also Dragon dances.
That, but Aerodactyl was. It does, yeah. So I mean, people were looking for, 6-point People saw 6-point Aerodactyl and said, yeah, I'm not really interested in that. But now that's 4 points. Like, yeah, that's great. That's possible. Torn check, Dragon Dance, speed. Yeah, something to keep an eye on.
I guess the other question is, obviously we've talked to death about like how the top 7 is the top 7. And kind of SB has a similar problem in terms of, right, what do you do on black? And I think people will definitely look at it in different ways, especially with DPL just gone, how metal structures like really struggle just with the way that kind of the metagame developed. Do you think people kind of shy away from that, especially if they're kind of towards the black? Do you think we'll see maybe like some ludicrous stuff like actually, metal Coco or?
No, I don't think we'll see. I mean, you might get one. There's always like one bizarre draft that somehow gets something. Like I think there was one draft that got like Torn T plus like, you know, Cartana or so, I don't remember. There was some bizarre draft that got something stupid. But no, I don't think you're gonna see, you know, 20-point Mons and 18-point Mons paired together. I think the back wheel is honestly fine. I actually would really love to have a back wheel pick in DCL, because I think the bigger drop-off in talent doesn't occur round 1, pick 7. I think it more so occurs like round 2, pick 5. So, you know, you get a Garchomp, you get a Tornado Steep, then your round 2 is going to be something like, you know, unless you're really lucky, it's going to be something like a Scizor or a Rotom Wash or an Aegislash, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in that back wheel pick, you know, you might get, you know, Mew plus Weavile. You might get, you know, Kyurem plus Zapdos. You might get, you know, Zeraora, Celesteela. You know, so there is some positivity in getting the back wheel, in that your round 2 is going to be a hell of a lot stronger than the round 2 of the person on the other side of the board.
Yeah. Like, this is nothing against like Garchomp, Rotom Washes or cores, because like, you know, they're obviously good in their own right, and then you kind of have the same.
They're great, but you just have a stronger round 2. Like that's the thing. So like, and something will fall. Like the first 4, Chomp, Torn, Lando, Coco are quite established, and I think Cartana is slowly establishing itself as number 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe rapidly establishing itself as number 5. It's happening quite quickly. But like, you know, Kyurem could fall to round 2. Zera could fall to back wheel. Like Mew could be taken before Cartana. You know, like some people love Mew.
Yeah.
Weavile could be a round 1 pick. You know, so there's a lot of variation in that back wheel that allows for a lot of options, I think. A lot of people came to me in seasonal, and they asked. They said, "Addie, what should I take? I'm pick, you know, 7 or I'm pick 8. Like, you know, all these top ones are gone." I said, you know, pick up Weavile. It's guaranteed speed, and
super
you know,
consistent.
it's very strong against, you know, the top part of the board. And you can pair it with Zapdos. You can pair it with, you know, Celesteela. You can pair it with, you know, Latios. I mean, these sound like very strong cores. You can pair it with Necrozma. You know, or vice versa, where I suggest, you know, oh, you can pick up, you know, Mew now and then Kyurem later, or whatever. Like, you know, so, you know, I think there might be some interesting options there. But I definitely don't think, I would be much more worried of being a front wheel than a back wheel, because it's so, if you fuck up round 2, round 3, and you're like front wheel,
You're toast.
the draft is fucked. The draft is over. Whereas like in the back wheel, pick 1, pick 2, it's really hard to like pick 2 Mons that like will suck. You know what I mean? It's really like I could close my eyes and pick up like 2 17 pointers at random, or 2 18 pointers, 17 pointers at random, I guess is more apt. And odds are it's a good core.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Unless you
like,
literally get Mew Victini, I think you'll be fine.
But like, I don't even think that's bad, to be honest.
Actually,
like, I mean, even like why not? Like, I don't know. So to me, I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that bad. I think what'll be really interesting, I think, will be what I'm most looking forward to see is the Chomp Torn debate, right? Because Torn had a great season, Chomp had kind of a mid-season again, and Chomp is sort of the universal pick one. So the interesting thing to see will be A, are people going to pick up Torn before they pick up Chomp? And that will be the first time in years that has happened.
Unless you're
and two is Chomp going to have a successful season?
Yeah.
Is it going to have a season where it finally goes, you know, above 50%?
Which it also
It's a reasonable
hasn't had
question.
Years, yeah. But that
Yeah,
ties back to what
so-
you said about, like, if you fuck up on that round 2, round 3, like, the draft is fucked. Yes, you may have a guard shot, but what do you
Yeah.
have with it?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited to see how the drafting turns out. You know, obviously I see things that are used quite low usage, and I drop them, and when they get picked up, it makes me really excited. So, you know, I want to see some Sun. I want to see some, like, you know, like some Raikou. I want to see some, like, you know, unburdened terrain shenanigans. I want to see some stall. I want to see some,
Bit of everything,
you
yeah.
know, some everything. So I'm very stoked to see. Now that this is the second time I've worked on the Sword and Shield tier list, kind of as the leader of it, I suppose. The draft always makes me so excited. I always cheer for my, you know, who are my to-be opponents.
diversity, essentially,
because
yeah.
I love seeing how people innovate. I love seeing people innovate. Please innovate, please. I'm gonna try. I have a few ideas in mind that I'm really stoked about.
Sure, there's still
That
plenty of
involve
time
mons that
to...
haven't been picked up
to cook.
in many tournaments. So, yeah.
So I guess kind of the last thing to just kind of on you, is there any other particular like trends that you think you caught on to during DPL that you think will kind of be addressed this DCL, or do you think it is going to be another instance of people trying to just innovate, or do you think there kind of is patterns starting to be recognized?
No, I think DCL is going to be a lot more informative than DPL, because the issue with DPL is you didn't have Theo in it, and I think Theo actually pushes the envelope more than people think.
100%.
Because he's sort of the metric to say, you know, can you, A, what does new stall look like? And B, can this team beat that team, right? So I think, you know, when my goofy ass team from DCL that had like no grounded poison and like, you know, no defensive backbone or whatever, when that was able to like muscle through a Theo team, I sort of said to myself, okay, this team is actually viable in spite of it not having, you know, the necessary qualities, quote unquote, that people have expected Swish teams to have. Whereas I think, you know, if a team really can't break through that level of fat, you know, I think it's a bit more unviable. It's creative, but it'll be a bit more unviable. So I think Theo is actually a very interesting metric all the time as to the viability of certain teams from what I've seen. And then I think you're just going to have a bit more variety of Sword and Shield players, I hope, from what I've heard. That being said, I think at the same time, while people will want to like try new things and stuff like that, there will probably be a bit more of a return to normalcy where people will draft, you know, the Lantern or the Stunfisk or the Nidos or whatever. I actually think that, you know, for, you know, the ground types that we dropped, like a Mamoswine and Diggersby, those really offensive ones, it's very likely that those mons might get picked up as offensive mons in their own right, and then you still have a Nido on the same draft or something as your Coco check. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be really interesting to see. But I'm excited for it. But I don't think anything is settled at all. Like, the trend, obviously, that I saw was bulky offense reign supreme, and that's really always been the case in Sword and Shield. But you saw a higher diversity of mons doing it, and I think that's what's exciting. So there you go. Hello. Oh God.
perfect. You went on for so long, I had to go do an errand real
Yeah.
quick, and you were still talking.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah,
Jesus.
no, that's perfect. But yeah, I think the moral of the story is that the last kind of hour has just definitely made me more excited for Switch than I probably have been in a while. So looking forward to seeing how it pans out.
Good. Well, you
Thank
better
you.
play in it.
Yeah,
It'll be
ooh.
fun.
I don't think anyone would trust me to play in it, that's for sure.
Oh no.
Yeah, I'm probably stuck in Aura jail,
Hopefully we
but
get some good games.
I don't mind that.
Just remember that usage is king.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Anyways, thank you very much for being here, Addison. It has been honestly such an interesting, hour of conversation?
Yeah,
So,
I think so.
yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed. kind of
If
actually-
anyone's interested in playing for Ryan, DM me. We're always looking for new talent.
Don't use this to plug.
Sorry, that's fine.
you're fine.
I'm using it to plug.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, it makes sense to plug that rather than the YouTube channel, which, you know, is the biggest...
That shit's been dead for.
Yeah, still the
forever.
biggest one of, you know, draft players in terms of, like,
That's
DCL.
true. L5 does not.
Suck it, L5. But,
Wow.
yeah. Anyways,
stuff.
I hope
Thanks
you
for
guys-
having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely, anytime. And I hope you guys have enjoyed us rambling on about this metagame for the next hour and 10 minutes, and I hope you're looking forward to seeing what is next in terms of kind of other DCL discussion topics. Like, I want to go over my own games from last year, I want to go over the other two metagames as I mentioned earlier, and I also have one about, like, team building and stuff like that, so if there's any other interesting ideas, do let me know. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.